Good evening and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, tonight's video I'm going to make my first attempt at unraveling what is the BROSR. And then I will also ponder on the question of, is it really the true way of playing D&D, or more specifically Advanced Dungeons & Dragons? So I'm going to try to tackle this and present it as fairly as I can, and also, show you some of the things that I think, if you are going to dig very deep into this style of gameplay, some of the things that, just in my perception, you'll probably need in order to do that. So, without further ado, let me just jump right into and set up where this is coming from. So, not this past weekend, I believe the weekend prior to, or maybe even 2 weekends ago, prior to yesterday, the RPG Pundit on his Inappropriate Characters video broadcast, he had Jeffro Johnson, who is the kind of the de facto leader of the BROSR. He is the most outspoken proponent for this style of gameplay. And basically, this style of gameplay is looking at the oldest or earliest versions of Dungeons and Dragons, including the precursors to Dungeons and Dragons, which would be Bronstein and Chainmail, and then taking a very literal, rules as written look at the domain play, mass combat play that is either written or implied in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. And so the basic tenets of the BROSR, as I understand them, is that number one, it's a focus on a 1-to-1 ratio of game time versus real time. So if during a game session, your player characters are active for 10 days, then in real time, you should not be playing those same characters within a 10-day time frame. You actually have to wait until the 11th day to pick up with that same group of characters. And the reason being is that you would throw off that 1-to-1 time ratio that that is a tenet of their belief, that this is what Gary Gygax truly meant as far as the optimal play mode of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Another tenet of theirs is that the domain play of player characters, or the patron play of player characters. So the belief is that the players are actually playing the patrons, and they are running a high level multi-layered campaign. And I'll talk about what that means by multi-layered campaign, but they're playing patrons, and those patrons are then organizing large groups of individuals, both support and then military as well. And the whole idea is that the pinnacle of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons gameplay is for mass combat, and it's for the grander scheme of things, so that they're not into getting down into the nitty gritty, individual boots on the ground kind of thing of adventuring. that is what their, that is what their underlings would do while they're playing these, much broader, geopolitical military exercises. The other part of the tenet of the BROSR is that you're not just playing one character, but you'll play multiple characters, and sometimes these characters are in the same campaign and in the same campaign time continuum. However, they will alternate out because when one group of characters is perhaps, resting or training or whatever, that's when you play another group of characters. And sometimes these characters might compete with one another, or they might be in direct conflict with one another. And these are all of these different moving parts that are taking place, and that the system overall is supposedly is supposed to be easier on the dungeon master in order to maintain control over this various things. But one thing that it does do, though, is that it takes scheduling of a game session pretty much out of the dungeon master's hands, and it's whenever the players want to play. If their characters are available for that time slot, then that's when that should take place. All right, and so the DM would just respond, and there's no, it's very sandboxy, it's very mass combat oriented, so that there doesn't have to be a lot of prep time put into each game session, because a lot of it is, at least from what I gather, a lot of it is hex crawling as they expand out and so on. So there's some videos that I've seen on this as well that that might be helpful, and I will link those in the description of this video, because I found that the video that I came across was really explained it in a way that I finally understood it. But what they're basically saying, what that individual, this is Dungeon Craft, what he was basically saying was that when you go out on an adventure, you go out just a certain amount of distance, do whatever adventure that you're going to do, and return, all right, all within that same day of of the adventure. So the player characters are never left out in the wilderness someplace where they are unsafe. They're always returning to their home base where they're completely safe, and they can, rest up, buy things, level up potentially. And if they can do all of that within 1 week's time, then they'll be ready to play for the next game session. Let's say you're playing, every Tuesday night. Well, they have to be able to encapsulate everything that they're doing to fit within a 7-day in-day, time frame, so that when they do go to the real world, that they're ready to come. If it extends beyond that, then they have to come back and play different characters, or a different group of players will come in with a different group of characters, and there's always chances of these various groups kind of crossing each other's paths, or potentially interfering with one another, and so on. So again, the claim is that this is much easier for a dungeon master to organize, and I'm really not quite there yet. But let me shift gears a little bit here and start looking at the question of, is it really Advanced Dungeons and Dragons RAW, or rules as written? Excuse me. So First thing I'm going to talk about is, or I'm going to show off, is that I found that one of the when I tried to understand the earliest incarnations of Dungeons and Dragons, I found that the DVD Secrets of Blackmore gave me a great deal of insight into what it was like, what the hobby was like in 1971, 72, 73, everything leading up to Dungeons and Dragons in 1974. And so this is really key for you to get your hands on, to watch through this and kind of see that evolution of what Dave Arneson actually brought to the table, and then Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson coming together, and how that moved along. And then you have you have the other individuals at the time. It's slipping my mind. David Wesley, David Wesley doing his running his Bronstein campaign, and I'm going to show that to you as well. And all of these different parts of wargaming. So this was tabletop wargaming that is really the basis for Dungeons and Dragons. And this is what the BROSR is basically saying, that that is the purest form of actually playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So let me just briefly bring that up here. So I have I have a I have a copy of the Barons of Bronstein. So this is kind of an extended version of the base game. I couldn't find a copy of the base game, so it is David Wesley's Bronstein, and basically this is his. This is the very like of the founding game that was played by Dave Arneson's group, and we go in here. So this is written by David A. Wesley, and you can see how like old the print is and everything. And it goes through the game concepts, the dice, the miniatures, getting started, and all of the various things, the character. Let's take a look at the character on page 3. It wasn't until I read these rules that I actually started to understand the dice mechanic, because when I watched the video, I wasn't quite sure what actual dice mechanics they're using. They only use 2d6 to resolve everything in this game. So very, very simple system. Only need 2d6 in order to do it. Goes into the character. Character creation is extremely simple. Although players must first master a few basic concepts, the system emphasizes choice and personal interaction over detailed mechanics. Even if some rules are needed, preserve the elements of risk. They go through the traits of a character. The literacy, not every character will know how to read, especially, so they have various little traits, whether they're illiterate, literate, and so on. Their social class plays a factor in this as well. And Lady Luck, all characters begin with the Chronicle with 10 points of luck, which will obviously affect your rolls. You can add a +1 to any die roll, and so on. So very, very simple mechanics in doing this. And this aspect of it has those elements of role playing, because you're going to, because you're going to have some variety between different characters based on what they're doing and what some of their backgrounds is, and so on. We go into various weapon types and such, equipment loadouts, and so on. So again, this is a precursor to what Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson are going to start to bring together once you get to old school or old D&D, which is the the first level. First is the wood grain box, and then the white box, which is the collector's edition of it. The dice mechanics are very, very simple. Like I said, you're going to roll 2d6 with a, and there's, there's a challenge rating basically. So, you need a 7 or above for like a fairly easy conflict resolution. You'll need a 9 or above for something a little bit more, a 12, or, well, 9 or above is a very difficult challenge, and so on. So there's different challenge levels. And below a certain number is an automatic. You don't even have to roll it. So the other system that I wanted to take a look at, and I do have to switch out the scene. Now we'll go back in, and now we're taking a look at Chainmail. So Chainmail is the rules for medieval miniatures by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. And I have a different copy of this. I have the soft cover copy of this. But again, so this is this is the 7th printing, 1979. So Chainmail obviously came out before Dungeons and Dragons. And so here we have some of the same rules, but you'll see this is very focused on miniatures. And this is really tabletop wargaming, more so than role-playing. Now, the one main component that Gary Gygax had added to this, all right, is that, and you can see there's all kinds of movement, and movement is done based on measurements on a gaming table and such. So movement is, 6 inches is actually 6 inches, on a table that you're playing this on. His introduction here is that there is the main section that Gary introduced here is on the fantasy component. So the fantasy supplement. So the fantasy supplement is basically taking all of the medieval or Napoleonic stats and figures for soldiers and such, movement and combat and everything, and it's putting a fantasy skin to those things. So halflings and sprites, if the man-size figure is 30 millimeter, they move 10 millimeters. If the man size is 40 millimeters, they move 20 millimeters, and so on. So there's a conversion, based on the size of the figure, and and then the movement rate based on that as well. And they go through the fantastic characteristics of halflings and sprites and dwarves and goblins, elves, orcs, heroes, and you can see everything is very basic. So a hero has has some description to them, has a morale rating, has a point value. So you're building armies by purchasing points and such. So again, very much a tabletop war game rather than simply a much more expansive role-playing game, and so on. So they go through quite a bit. So so I would recommend that if you're going to get into this style of play, that you take a look at some of these founding things. So I got the Barons of Bronstein on drive-through for like $3. I picked up a soft cover copy of Chainmail. You can get this on drive-through, but I choose not to because it's it's going to come it's going to come through Wizards of the Coast, and I don't purchase from them. So I went on eBay. I got this for $17 on eBay. So I'm perfectly happy, even if I spent a few extra bucks for it, to have gotten it from eBay rather than there. And again, always nice to have the physical copy of things, as well as the PDFs, which you can find PDFs for a lot of these things online anyway. So Chainmail, take a look at it, and you'll get a sense of just the tabletop wargaming foundation to it. Now, of course, you need the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, which I have behind me. I should have had that over here. And there are several pages that are talking about timekeeping and en masse combat, or at least the types of units and such that would be in a mass combat thing. Plus domain play, which is really the building of strongholds and such. And so you have that as well. So now we're talking about at least two sources now. We're talking about Chainmail and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Again, I always recommend watching this as well to see how they're doing it. You have Bronstein, which is the basis, one of the basic tools or systems that they're using in style of play. And then another book, which I haven't really dug too much into this, but one that I know that the BROSR, at least some of the members of the BROSR actually use, is Adventure Conqueror King system. And this is by Alexander McCree. And I specifically went to the campaign section where it talks about domain play. And that is one of the strong suits of this game system, and probably why they also use this is because it really does handle the management of strongholds and domains, and hiring of the soldiery or construction crews, and just getting into both the macro and the microeconomics of running a domain. And that includes morale management and, supplies and logistics and of course, troop movements and such. So it really does elevate that level of play upwards to the point that you're getting into great detail about running what would be considered a very high level campaign in order to do that. Now, again, their definition of a campaign is that it's the campaign world setting on a set time continuum. That's what constitutes a campaign. So you can swap out characters, you're still in the same campaign. You can swap out players, you're still in the same campaign. So it's all about the campaign setting and its timeline. And its timeline is continuous. And that way, any group of players with any group of characters can step into this and be part of that same campaign, which I can certainly understand has a great deal of appeal, because just in that sense alone, it is less work for the DM to actually do. However, I think that managing multiple groups of players or multiple characters for each player on potentially different time schedules, I think that that's a real tough thing to pull together. And I'm not quite certain that is as long and sustainable as their proponents, the BROSR proponents, make it out to be. That being said, there's the other issue that I was really struggling with, and I still not too sure on, is that that 1-to-1 ratio of time, game time versus real time. You have to have a lot of time available in order to play it that way. You have to be able to schedule, not even based on your own schedule as a dungeon master, but if your players say, "Hey, we want to play next Thursday," in order for this thing to work, you kind of have to make up for that. You know, you have to accommodate that. And to me, that's where it really falls apart. Is that you might have so many players involved that their demands to play might exceed your time in the real world in order to actually pull it off. And the only way that you might be able to compensate for that is to keep on shortening your sessions down in order to get multiple sessions in or whatever. And I'm sure that the BROSR will argue against that, or they'll say that's not really what it means. But I really don't see how it works any other way. So we have that other issue coming up is the time management. Now, on Twitter about a week ago, someone had tagged Luke Gygax, the son of Gary Gygax, and basically said, you know, how strictly to the one-to-one time scale did your father use? And he actually responded, and he said he was certainly not strict with it. Basically he was saying he would flex the real like the game time. So sometimes the game time during one game session might be 10 days, and other times it might only be a few hours of game time. But when they got to their next scheduled time schedule, they just played those same characters again. So there was a disconnect between the in-game time versus the real time. It certainly was not one-to-one, and that's clearly what he had stated. So there you have an instance of the BROSR saying that Gary's intent was one thing, but Gary tended not to follow his own rules as written. And this has been stated a number of times in a number of places that Gary Gygax homebrewed Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. He did not play it rules as written. And I've actually read his articles, whether it be on Dragon's Foot or other places, where he's actually said, yeah, you know what, that wasn't a very good rule. I shouldn't have used that. I know specifically he said that the monks in the player's handbook should not be used. They should be replaced by the monks in the in Oriental Adventures. He said it was a much better, better conceptualized, monk, in his view, and so I recall him saying that the grappling wasn't a very good system either. So there was a lot of things that Gary Gygax homebrewed and did not follow rules as written. So looking at AD&D RAW, it's pretty clear that a good number of the people within the BROSR don't run AD&D RAW. They're adding these other components in, whether it be Bronstein or Chainmail or Adventure Conqueror King. I was hoping to ask, and I didn't get the opportunity, over the last couple of days. I was hoping to ask, well, what actual combat system are you using in order to stay to this tenet of AD&D RAW? And the reason why I asked that, and I haven't done the box opening yet, was I actually picked up the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons battle system. I wanted to take a look at it and see, is this, if they're not using this, it's kind of hard to argue that that they're really playing AD&D RAW. This is the battle system that was made for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Certainly, I believe the first edition specifically, and so if you're going to claim that it's raw, then you should be using this. So like I said, I haven't done the box opening yet on this. I haven't, really started digging into it and taking a look at it. May I actually use it? Probably. I might actually consider using it if it is a good system. And just like I'm going to most likely use, I'm most likely going to use Adventure Conqueror King for domain play once my player character group, who is an AD&D First Edition campaign, once they get to the point of really digging into this, that's certainly something, a resource that I will use in order to kind of flesh it out. I've been trying to keep them on a one-to-one basis, but it is very difficult, between scheduling and such. So, I'm willing to sacrifice game time and flex game time in order to match up. It's just a reality of having a set schedule. So taking that first real look into, the BROSR and, and some of the tenets that they claim, AD&D RAW, I don't believe that they run AD&D RAW. Gary Gygax didn't run AD&D RAW. And, it was pretty much established that, that they actually don't, he didn't. And I think that a very strict interpretation of anything that Gary Gygax wrote in a rule book is further challenged by the fact that a lot of times Gary contradicts himself. It might be in the same paragraph or it might be in two different sections of the book. But I think in the end, if you take everything in its totality, he basically said, have fun at your table. That's the main point. If you're not having fun at your table, no matter whether you follow the rules or don't, is irrelevant. You need to do what's going to work at your table and keep your players coming back and everyone having a good time, or mostly everyone having a good time, and just making sure that you're not playing a totally different game, but you're not letting the rules bog you down to the point that you're not having fun anymore either. So it's a balancing act, and you got to just with experience, you'll see, all right, this I know doesn't work, or this, even though I like it, my players don't, so I'm probably gonna try to tweak it or even remove it if it's that much of a sticking point. And and I'm going to expand and try to get the players into that higher level play, and thinking on much more broader terms, because that I at least agree should be the end goal, is to get the players to the point that they're really pushing that domain kind of play, and then they can roll up new characters and have new characters living within that world, still within that campaign time continuum, but just doing other things. And so you can kind of break things up that way, and mix it around a bit more, but you're still not going to tie it to that one-to-one. I still don't see how that is going to work. So finally, is it the true way to play AD&D? No, it's not. There's no such thing as a true way of doing it. And I think that's where the BROSR really kind of loses it, is when they try to claim that, oh no, this is the one true way. Anytime that you say something is the only way, or the only true way, which is even more beyond, the reality of it is that anytime you say that, you're going to lose. It's just not, you're not going to convince as many people, and it becomes harder to make your case. There is no true way of playing a game with this many different rules and rule interpretations, and optional rules and such. There's just no. An extremely difficult argument to make that with something this complex that there's only one true way of actually doing it. And so I think that they kind of do their belief in the game system that they're trying to push, or the the way that they're play the game. I think that they do themselves a disservice when they say this is the only true way, because that immediately puts everyone into a very skeptical look at what they're actually saying. And that's what really revealed. It's like, well, if you're saying AD&D RAW, but you're using all of these other resources, then you're, you know, in fact, not AD&D RAW. And just because the Dungeon Master's Guide might have some of these sources listed in the Appendix N, where they're talking, oh, you know what, we looked at this game or that game, or we looked at this novel or that novel, and so that's where all these ideas come from. You're still not playing the game rules raw by introducing all of these other things as well. So, bottom line, like I said, this is my first real trying to dig into, a greater understanding of what the BROSR is, and it's an attempt to try to unravel some of their ideas. I like their idea of expanding to that domain play. That to me, I think, has a high interest amongst the players. I also, to a slightly lesser extent, believe that after you've played for a long time with the same group of players, and they're playing just a single character apiece, it might be a good idea to kind of mix things up by having them roll a brand new character, and have those characters do something on the side or whatever. But you don't have to. You fit them in within the game world's time continuum, but you don't have to have that mirrored in the real world, because the real world just has a way of getting in the way of your gaming, which makes sense. Most of us have to make that alteration in what we're doing. So so bottom line, I mean, I certainly would suggest that you take a look at some of these things. Um, you know, Definitely take a look at the Secrets of Blackmore if you can get your hands on it. It was really well worth the $30 or whatever that the DVD cost, and a great group of people surround this as well. Very active on on Twitter, so you can speak to them about this, and such. So definitely pick up this. Again, you can get your hands on Chainmail. Like I said, I found a very cheap alternative, less than $20. You can get a copy of it and just take a look at it. Even if you don't run a tabletop war game, you have no interest in it. It's good to see where it comes from. Taking a look at, so look for I'll bring it up real quick and just flash it here. So the Barons of Bronstein, and let me just bring it up here so you can see. So like I said, it was like $3 on drive-through. So get a hold of a copy. Old House Rules. All right. So this was done by James and Robin George, but it's based or inspired by David Wesley's Bronstein. Really interesting read. So certainly try to get your hands on that. Like I said, it's cheap. It's like $3 for the PDF on drive-through. So recommend you taking a look at that. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You'll have a great evening.